Hello, my name is Abe, and I'm the Madakan hero. And I'm a Slig, and I'm gonna beat the out of the Madakans.
Oh my god. You do a great job with those.
I've literally, since I've been a kid, I've been practicing all the voices.
Hello, we are Bloobcast. I'm Rob.
I'm James.
And I'm Euan. But the question is, why are we called the Bloobcast?
Yes! Yeah. Hello, my name is James, and welcome to the podcast on Oddworld, the weird dark fantasy game that is beloved by vegetarian schmucks everywhere. Except me, Barry the Slick.
And me, Harry the Gluck. I have a career to consider!
I hope that was sufficient.
Yes,
I kind of stumbled at the Glocken accent there.
We do not have two additional co-hosts. James is just talking to himself.
Hello.
So today we are talking about Oddworld. As I said, it's a dark fantasy PS1 PC game that was released in the 90s. And basically it's involving a protagonist called Abe, the Madakan.
That's me. My name is Abe. I was Employee of the Year. Now I'm dead meat.
Oddworld takes place on this weird world full of magic and technology that's kind of gone horribly, horribly wrong. You play as a character that is enslaved by an evil corporation that is out there for your meat and is out there to eat you and your buddies, basically, every member of your species.
This new kind of meat. It was us!
And the whole world is being destroyed by the industrialists. You have to face off against robot sligs. You have to possess them using dark powers. And it's just amazing. It's a mythological undertaking to the extreme. I have so many good words for it. I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Yes, I agree, because Oddworld was back when I was in uni and I was discovering the PS1, which we'll get into later when we talk about how we discovered Oddworld. Oddworld was one of the standout games when I was going through all the PS1 games I missed through my childhood.
Do we want to jump in and talk about how we discovered Oddworld?
Yeah, James, you are the biggest Oddworld fan out of all three of us.
Sure thing, thank you.
So yeah, go for it.
Cool, right, so for me, I was really young. Probably I'm going back to about 6, 7, potentially. I really hadn't played video games before until we got the PS1. And we got the PS1, and it was a gift to my brother from my parents. But obviously the whole family got to play it whenever we wanted to. And the first game that I ever got on there was Tarzan. I also had Mickey Mouse's... I can't remember the exact name. It was a Mickey Mouse adventure game.
Wild Adventure?
Yeah, that's the one. You got it. So I played that. The third ever game I played was Crash Bandicoot. But then the fourth ever game I played on my PS1 was Oddworld Abe's Oddysee, which my dad got lent to him by a colleague of his at work. He just came up to his mate at work and said, my boys have got this new console. Do you know any games that they might enjoy? I said, oh yeah, I got this game here called Oddworld. So we plugged that in one day. And all the previous games we had played before involved lives and platformers and, you can get a game over and stuff like that. This one was different. It was a game that involved infinite lives. And you weren't running around as this action hero, kicking booty or whatever. You were this little frail man walking around and using logic and magic to kind of overcome your enemies, the sligs. And this really blew my mind as a kid. And also it was the first kind of dark, gothic game that I came across as a kid. Before that, everything was kind of kid-friendly. Even though I think it was 11+, I want to say Oddworld was, or probably...
Yeah, 11+, that's right, yeah.
So, I was probably too young to play it, but I still played it anyway. But it just really was such a mind-boggling thing to experience for the first time. I'd never experienced anything like Oddworld. So, first of all, I played a little bit of the first level. I kept playing the first level over and over again, and watching this first cutscene over and over again, just getting sucked into the world and the cinematics and just how it all looked visually, because there was nothing anywhere else that I could see that in, you know what I mean? But I was also absolutely scared to death about playing it because of just being chased by paramites and scrabs and sligs. So I ended up watching my brother and my dad and my mum playing most of it. The whole family got together and played Oddworld. We really bonded over this one game. Yeah, no, literally, we're all massive Oddworld fans. It was the one game we all kind of came together just to sit at the sofa and play and watch together. It was absolutely just... it's a big part of my life, big part of my childhood. And I've been obsessed with Oddworld ever since, so I think I'll conclude that there.
That's really interesting, you saying about your whole family loving it, because my understanding from the director, Lorne Lanning, who is the director of Oddworld, talked about how he wanted the game to basically be a game for adults that children can enjoy, was the idea, or something along those lines. It was almost like a Simpsons idea, because the Simpsons had a similar ethos of like they wrote it for adults and then children happened to like it. But yeah, no, just I think it's really cool that your whole family, and that was the other thing Lanning talked about, was that like the traditional gamer who would usually be like a boy or like a young man or whatever, would play a game or would buy the game, but then like the whole family would become interested in this game as well, and everyone would suddenly, and it would kind of spread out that way, where it wasn't just the typical gamer demographic.
Yeah, that's something Lorne Lanning himself set out because so I've flicked through the book Oddworld, was it Abe's Origins, and he kind of spoke about this, where he kind of wanted to he saw video games as kind of like the future of entertainment. There's at the time it's kind of seen as kind of like a children's toy. So he kind of wanted to do something more with the medium. He kind of wanted to tell like a story which had meaning to it. Yes,
absolutely. There's a lot of that going on, really. I think he wanted to... Because he, before Oddworld in game development, he was into filmmaking along with Sherry McKenna, his kind of the partner producer of the company of Oddworld and Hamilton's. And I believe she worked on the Back to the Future ride, actually.
Great bombship! The impact between the two vehicles should send us straight back to the Institute.
Interestingly enough, they both...
She did, yes.
Yeah, so they were both like big film makers, and they're revolutionaries. Well, they wanted to revolutionise storytelling, and Lorne Lanning, as you guys have read, he worked in the military designing weapons, I think he was designing weapons on like using computers and stuff, and he realised computers and also video games were going to take off, so he persuaded Sherry McKenna to sort of take storytelling, this idea of like Abe and all that, into video games, and really it was an untouched medium, and he thought we can do so much more of this, and in many ways he revolutionised storytelling in video games. I think it's the first video game I came across where the story came first, I felt, at least, and the universe and the world building and everything like that, and the characters. So that's another reason why it left such an impression on me. I mean, Mickey Mouse, I can't remember the name of it. That Mickey Mouse game didn't really do much of that. So, but yeah, there's a story I'd like to tell you guys, because you were saying how it reaches out to different audiences and stuff like that. There's a gentleman that did play this game. It's a very beautiful story, but I'll tell you guys about that a bit later on when you...
Yeah, I think I know the story you mean. But I'm going to go on to my story now. So
please do.
Yeah, so my first exposure to Oddworld came, weirdly enough, via Facebook back in the year 2010. So there was a week around November, December 2010 where I don't remember why, but for some reason people changed their profile picture to a cartoon character from their childhood. Someone from my friends list changed their picture to this weird green alien thing. And I was like, well, this looks cool. And I commented on how sweet it was. And I got a few comments like, oh my God, you don't know what Oddworld is? And I can't realise it was like a PS1 game, and I was like, it must have just passed me by, because as I said in our Spyro episode, which is our third episode, if you want to go back and listen,
good episode.
I was a very late adopter. Sorry, what's that?
I was just saying that was very good. I was just I beg pardon. I was just saying it was a good episode. Carry on, I interrupted.
Yeah, but yeah, as I said in that episode, I was a very late adopter of the PS1, so I didn't get the PS1 until like the PS2 was out, and I got the PS2 a year later, so I didn't really get to play a lot of the PS1 classics, as it were. So I didn't really give Oddworld like that much thought after that until 2013 when I started watching Kadikarus on YouTube, and he included the follow-up to Abe's Oddysee, Abe's Exoddus, on his top 20 PS1 games of all time. And based on that, I thought, let's give this game a go, because I think it was like number 4 on his list. So I thought, I remember buying it, and I remember finding it really hard, but I was instantly in love with how it combined like its dark and twisted nature with a sense of humour, which is something that I'm always drawn to, and they can like balance the two tones perfectly, rather than having things like po-face and miserable Zack Snyder.
Oh god.
But yeah, I never picked up the original Abe's Oddysee because I heard it lacked on the quality of life mechanics that Exoddus had, like being able to talk to multiple Dockons at once and being able to quick save wherever you want, rather than having to go back to checkpoints when you die. I remember I did play New and Tasty when it first came out, but I never finished it for some reason because I was entering my last year at uni at the time, so I was very limited in my free time, so I had other things taking my interest. I think I remember it's like because the new Thunderbirds was coming out at the time, and also I was getting into DC, so those things were taking my interest, and I drifted away from other things, which is a shame, but that's uni for you. But I did get around to New and Tasty eventually in 2018 when as I mentioned earlier, the Abe's Origins art book came out. So I was so remember I loved Exoddus so much, I pledged for not just the book but this but the game that came with, because he got a CD-ROM which had the first 2 games on it, which had all this extra stuff, which is really cool. And then I've decided to finally play New and Tasty all the way through. If you don't know, New and Tasty is the reimagining of Abe's Oddysee. And I think it took me about a week to play through it, and I remember proudly tweeting about completing it, which I recently dug up to show to James Newman, where I said I saved 202 Madokans, and Oddworld themselves on Twitter responded saying, "Oh, well done, glad you enjoyed the game." Wow. And then I think I replayed Exoddus before playing Munch's Oddysee. So yeah, I never played the original Abe's Oddysee until we did this episode. I only got a copy for myself recently, back in November, when we all 3 of us went to London Film and Comic Con, and I played through it. I had some difficulties doing so, which we'll get into later, but yeah, overall I enjoyed it, and I'm excited to discuss it.
Yeah, cool. And now we move on to Euan, my friend. And what's your story?
My story is probably quite similar to my Stingray experience, where I just heard about it and then watched it. No, it wasn't quite that much, because when James and I were discussing Samurai Jack and various other things when we were at university, I do have a very clear memory of James bringing up Oddworld, because I'd never heard of it, like, at all. And I was pretty into gaming generally. And, I was, like, I'd played a lot of PlayStation 1 games. I had played Mickey Mouse's Wild Adventure, played Toy Story 2 on the PlayStation 1, and that was great. I played PS1 games.
Toy Story 2 is such a good game.
I never came across Oddworld. I think it was around, I think I just saw it on, I think it was being sold on the GOG website, Good Old Games website.
GOG.
So I bought it on that, but then I never really got round to playing it, and then I have a very distinct memory of playing it on the train. Like I was just on my laptop, like, traveling, and I played a bit, and I got I think I did alright. I got to the stockyards. So I wasn't doing terribly playing it, but I did find it quite finicky getting the or playing with the kind of just with the laptop. So I eventually got it on the PlayStation 3, because I'm one of those people who still does that and plays old PS1 games on the PlayStation 3. And so I've now got Oddysee and Exoddus on that. And I started playing Oddysee a couple years ago. Didn't get very far. I think I also only ever got to the stockyard before I gave up for whatever reason. I think it was just mainly just figuring out the controls and kind of getting a handle of how it all worked. But again, I kind of made a concerted effort to complete it for the episode, and I did. And I think, as Rob said, it could be quite challenging, and I definitely had some teething issues with a few sections. But I completed it, and I played Oddworld New and Tasty, as Rob said, the remake, and I completed that, and I did a much better job completing that one, like, and doing quite well with that. But yeah, now I'm currently playing Exoddus for the first time, and the sequel to the original Oddysee. And as Rob said, there's, like, the new game Soulstorm, which is kind of sequel to New and Tasty, but it's not really a remake of.
It's a retelling.
Exoddus.
It's a complete reboot. Yeah,
it's a complete reboot. So that's a whole different thing. But anyway, so it's a very boring story by comparison to I think James and Rob, but that's my
just to clarify. Just clarify. Just quickly, we should say that we are focusing mainly on Oddysee and New and Tasty, I think, for this episode, and we might come back to sort of Exoddus, maybe Soulstorm and stuff, and Munch's Oddysee, Stranger's Wrath and stuff on another episode. Because there's quite a lot of games.
Maybe even the Game Boy ones.
Yeah, no, I've got those on my shelf actually. And the Munchies Odyssey Game Boy game, that's pretty damn good. That game. I'm just going to put that out there. I'll fight. That's the hill I'm going to die on.
One thing I want to say before we move on to the discussion is Oddworld was actually one of the franchises me and James first bonded over because back in the first lockdown days of 2020, Euan, he invited me and James to do a viewing of Samurai Jack over Messenger. So we all kind of had all video called each other while watching Samurai Jack.
We should do that.
And during the discussion, yeah, that was great. But Euan asked me, Rob, I think you knew I was a fan of Oddworld as well as James. He asked me, Rob, do you like Oddworld? And of course, oh yes, I love Oddworld. And James was like, oh my god, Oddworld. But yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah, literally, I nerded out because there's not a lot of people out there that love Oddworld. Actually, my brother and I love Oddworld, and we've for years really struggled to meet other people that like Oddworld. A lot of people that like Crash and Spyro and everything like that, and Rayman. But Oddworld was just that weird, obscure thing that I could never really talk to people about. So it was cool to talk to Rob about. It's like, oh my god, another that's like me.
To be fair, James, do you remember there was that friend of mine at the pub?
I remember this. No, I do remember this. Yeah. I was really drunk, and I kept on saying, "You need to play this game. There's a fart button. It's amazing."
She was all about the fart button, which was great. Because this is the thing. For a game that we've touted as being a game for adults and all of that sort of thing, it does have a fart button, and your character basically communicates with other characters through or at least one of the things he can do is fart. And this is part of their culture.
Lorne Lanning hates that.
I know, I don't agree. Lanning. Yeah, I love Lorne Lanning, but I don't agree with him. That's wrong. Keep the fart button, damn you. That's one of the...
Why does Lorne Lanning hate the fart button?
Okay, so from the get-go, I read about this. He hated the fart button. But he wants a very serious sort of story, I get the impression. He wants to tell a story that hits the right notes and has a message, and you fair play to him. That's one of the strengths of Oddworld. But one of the other strengths of Oddworld is that it's combined with the fact that it's humorous and light-hearted. Despite this dark world, it's nice balance of yin and yang between being a bit silly and a bit goofy, but also being incredibly bloody dark. But the fart button, in my opinion, is a most welcome addition to that. All these horrible things are happening. You're being chased by monsters and stuff, but yet you're also farting in the corner. I think that's hilarious. But Lorne Lanning, he, right from the get-go, thought it was too silly. He thought, no, why are we adding a fart button? It's cheap humour, do you know what I mean? But all the other colleagues, the other people in Oddworld working at the company at the time loved it, and the press loved it as well. The press kept on talking about this fart button, so he kind of had his hand forced.
Well, it's we put that in there, and then I wanted to take it out, and the publishers and the team was like, no, we can't. And I was like, all they're going to talk about is the farting, man. And totally,
don't shy away from that. Be proud of the fact.
I know, but I wanted to in the beginning. And I got a little scared because I thought that's all they would talk about. And then it was funny because then I got on CNN and they were like, "But Abe does something really unique," and I had no idea what they were talking about. And the people are off screen, going, "The fart," and I was like, yeah, he possesses guys." He just totally evaded me, which is completely embarrassing, but it happens. Yeah, the fart.
And then the second game, Exoddus, allowed you to possess.
Yeah.
You can possess flying farts that explode.
It's brilliant. You can possess a flying fart. But yeah, Exoddus, again, there's a lot to discuss on that one. But with Oddyseey, yeah, there is a fart button. You can literally press it over and over again. It goes just repeatedly. It's so brilliant.
And he laughs after he does it as well.
And so do the other Madokans. The Madokans would laugh at you going like, It's just amazing. But yeah,
one thing I want to talk about, it's kind of tied to Oddyseey, but the series as a whole, is how ambitious that whole series is, because the mainline games in the series are part of something called the Oddworld Quintology, which was supposed to be which is intended to be ever expanding and evolving continuous story, which is intended to be in 5 parts. So I think Abe's Oddyssey was the first part, then the next part was Munch's Odyssey, with Abe's Exodus being a bonus game.
Yeah.
But sadly, they never got further than that, because the next game, Squeak's Odyssey, never came about. And it's a shame because they've just rebooted the whole thing recently. It's a shame we could never see what the original version of the Quintology would have looked like.
Yeah, I'm a bit mixed about that. I kind of would have liked if they just carried on from where they left off. They already had a really good story built up there and a lot of great characters. I don't think there's ever been a bad Oddworld game, really. And I think it would have been nice if they just carried on from Munch's Oddysee / Strangest Wrath. I think that would have been a smarter move.
Let's get things back a bit to Oddysee, because I want to discuss the actual plot. So the plot is basically a slave in this massive factory called Rupture Farms, which is basically a big food processing plant where you've taken all of the various inhabitants of Oddworld, or at least of the place where the Madokans, which is what Abe is, this little kind of gremlin creature. The Madokans, land has been kind of taken over by this race called the Gluckans, who have basically, they've built this huge place called Rupture Farms, and they've been processing all the various creatures from the Madokan world or land as meat, as products to be sold off, like the Paramite pie, for instance.
We still made Paramite pies.
Various, so they've wiped these creatures to extinction. There's only a few creatures left, and then Abe, while he's wandering along, stumbles across this meeting between the Gluckans, and there's like the Slig guy as well. The Slig is this guy with a weird octopus face.
How we'd make new and tasty, I was still to find. The truth, it turned out. Now that would blow my mind.
And he discovers that they're going to use the Madokan slaves as the newest meat product. As the new and tasty, as the later game is called, but there was the new and tasty posters that he sees of the Madokan. What was it called? The Madokan food, or like the
Madokan Pops.
The Madokan Pop. That was it.
You know what's in a Madokan Pop?
And so Abe realizes he's in this horrifying factory, and then the next product's gonna be him. So then starts the Odyssey of his escape from the factory, and then he makes it to his ancestral home.
I didn't even know I had a destiny, so get me out of here!
Yeah. One thing that's really dark about the intro is when Abe's running past at the start, you instantly get a wanted post of him holding up like a mug shot.
I love
and it's
that.
like,
the Magog Cartel's most wanted terrorist, Abe. That lone disgruntled janitor continues to cripple factories of the Uguay Estate and the Magog Cartel.
I mean, I didn't get this point myself. I think something Kadir Chris brought up in one of his Oddworld videos, but it's like, did they just get all the Madokans to have mugshots in case anyone ever kind of like revolted or anything?
Yeah.
So they could. It's very dark and twisted.
It's heavily implied. It's like you could just imagine this poor Madokan holding his son, like, what am I doing with this sign? It's like, just smile for the camera. It's like, if he tries to escape, you know what to do.
Maybe it's like the start of Squid Game. Do you remember? I don't know if you saw
that
show. Yeah, the bit at the beginning with is it Jihoon? He smiles for the camera right before they're about to send them all to like their deaths, So it's probably the same thing where they put everyone up for a little mugshot. It's like a passport photo, and then it's like, oh, oops.
One of the things I want to jump into is just talking about Abe. Like, Abe is amazing, but he's one of my favourite fictional characters probably ever.
He's great.
Like, I mean, I've got a whole list of things here I just want to talk about here. Like, with Abe... like, Abe... Well, when I was a kid, right, and I was playing Oddworld, one of the things I loved about Abe was that he's literally not Superman, he's not Batman, he's not Spider-Man, he's this little skinny guy working at this horrible job. And I had this fantasy when I was in primary school, where I thought, what if one day, like, I was like Abe, where I had, like, suddenly the school got taken over by aliens or something like that, and I had to go rescue all my friends and stuff like that, and save the day, just like Abe or something like that. That was kind of like how I felt playing that game. I was like, oh, I'd love to be like Abe. And he was awkward as well. He was a very awkward guy that's not intelligent. He wasn't He's not everything you get in a typical hero where they're super and perfect in every way. He's a very flawed character. And to this day, I applied to a tweet from Oddworld saying, what does Oddworld mean to you? And I said, basically, Abe is basically your typical average Joe that works a 9-to-5 job and still is absolutely brilliant. And despite having nothing, no weapons, no strength, no massively redeeming qualities. I mean, there's a few, but ultimately he prevails. And he still smiles as well. He's in these horrible situations, being chased by monsters, like literally just these things with guns. I mean, his whole entire race is in a horrible situation. It's a nightmare. And yet he's still goofing around and he succeeds, and that is really what you can take away from Oddworld. You can work a 9-to-5 job, but you can still be the hero, I think, and that's what I get from Oddworld. That's kind of the philosophy I take from it.
That ties into the gameplay because Abe is at the very bottom of the food chain in Oddworld, as well as his race, because obviously in like Rupture Farms, which is where he works, you've got the sneaks and they kill you in one hit like everything else in the game, but then when you get outside, all the other monsters, they're higher in the food chain than you, so they also kill you instantly. But also by the end of the game, you can like master all these things like possession and like using like mines, and it's like you can turn Abe into like this really amazing, like ultra powerful thing if you play the game right.
But that's the thing, he develops as you go along as well. I think that's the ultimate thing, is the hero's journey portrayed for the average Joe. He goes from being the average Joe to an actual messiah almost, but as you go along, you complete tasks and stuff like that, and you meet the criteria of the Madokans, rescue all your friends, and build up your karma, and eventually you rise up to what is essentially like semi-godhood by the end. But ultimately, that's the strength of Abe, is that he finds a way, and he goes from being nothing to everything at the end, and he becomes a hero. I just love that, really. Yeah.
I like that as you mentioned with the gameplay, the fact that he trips over, he slips up.
Yep.
He's very easy to he's very easy to kill. If you run into booby traps or if you fall off a cliff, there's so many ways for the poor guy to die.
He's like paper.
Yeah, and I remember he reminded me a lot. Again, this is a specific video game thing, but he reminded me a lot of Wonder from Shadow of the Colossus, which is another great. That's a PlayStation 2 game, but that's kind of considered one of the classics of the PS2 era. But that's kind of got a similar vibe where you're a very tiny little person against these huge colossi monsters, and in that game as well, you trip up, you fall over, it's very easy to get killed. And it just reminded me of that. Like he's very small in the world that he's, because it's like ultimately Oddworld is a 2D game. It's almost like Mario in a lot of ways, but it's so not Mario.
The gameplay.
I can actually talk about this because the game is plays like a 2D character action platform, which is a specific genre of game.
Yeah.
So kind of like the original first version of the game called Flashback. I think Tomb Raider was kind of like this, but in a 3D perspective.
Yeah.
But basically, the gameplay revolves around precise platforming and puzzles. This can be very cruel, as there is no leave for error. But the one thing I think this game does add is the ability to talk to initial commands to NPCs and possess like the standard enemies in the game. You cannot, in this one, you can only talk to one at a time, but it is an integral part of the game because you need to talk to the Madokan because it's something that affects like the ending at the end of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think two things you brought up there, Rob, that I think we should just jump into. I think we should get it out of the way because you guys had a few issues.
Yes.
I think we should just kind of get that out of the way. Let's just talk about the flaws because I mean I've kind of been singing a lot of praise about Oddworld, but there are a few issues. We're just going to start off with the checkpoint system and the save system.
Yes.
It's not great.
Yes,
it's not great.
No, yeah. I think the game is difficult, but for the most part, I didn't find frustrating. And most of the time, I found myself wanting to keep playing to get past the sections I was having trouble with. But the lack of checkpoints gets really frustrating in certain sections. I think the point that really got me was this part that you've got to jump over this platform with swinging boulders, but on top, because swinging boulders is not difficult enough apparently, you have got these tiny little bats you can barely see flying at the top of the screen, and if you like stall for too long or hesitate, these bats will fly down and eat you and kill you one hit.
I found a way to get past that. You just got to duck in the right place.
Yeah, I know, but there's no check, because if you up at that part, you've.
Let me just write down my tokens.
You've got to defuse a mine while another bat flies overhead, and if you die, you have to do it all over again. And I was just like, this was the point where I was like, this is too much. So I just downloaded a ROM of the game and played it through an emulator, so I could use save states and save where I wanted.
Yeah, it's not great, this save system. I mean, I can't really defend Oddworld there, really. As much as I love it, the save system is very dated, and I always lock myself out of saving all of the Madokans at the end of the game. So I basically almost ruined my entire playthrough because of a save moment, but fortunately, I managed to kill myself at the right time, so I jumped into a bomb and then respawned at the right place. But the save system's not great. Sometimes I think the way the game responds to the jump button is not. I think it's a bit broken as well. I mean, Euan shot a video.
Exoddus has that as well. I remember Euan sent the video of doing one section, and he put it perfectly. It's like, oh, you weren't perfect? Well, f*** you.
I'm going to write that down. But yeah, it's just... It was... So there's a video Euan recorded where basically it was on the Paramite temples, and it was like the Paramite run, basically. And he was running, and actually you could see him press the X button in this video, and it not responding. Hello, this is James, the audio editor of this podcast. Just to let you know, the following is actually the audio recording that we're discussing here of Euan playing Oddworld and having a very fun time.
Hello, and welcome to me playing this bullshit section of Oddworld. I'm going to see if I can set this up right. Okay. So you see, I did everything just about right there. I might have been 1 second too slow. But yeah, this bit is great. I'm loving this bit.
Like, yeah, okay, he's got evidence. It's broken.
You have to push it very hard, or at the exact right point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of precision stuff in this game, which, like, a lot of the time, this game is very slow moving. It's not a game where you should really be expected to do precision stuff. Yeah. But then it asks you to do precise movements anyway, and it's infuriating. And like as Rob said, there's the boulder section where it's like so difficult to jump at the right time and to duck at the same time. You know, the one saving grace I think to the gameplay and to the saving system is kind of what James said earlier, was that there's no life system. There's no game over. Like, the nice thing about this game is that you can keep retrying a section over and over again until you do it. You know, it doesn't say, oh, oops, you died, go back to the beginning of the game, or anything like that. Which is a big plus over games from this era. There's a lot of games that don't have this. So I give the game full props for that. But the Paramite temple it took a piece of my soul.
That's where a lot of people quit, myself included as a kid. When you reach, especially the Scrab Ania temple, like Scrab temple, that's, in my opinion, is like the literal worst in the whole game. I think it's the worst level in the whole game. Even though the levels that have like come afterwards are nowhere near as hard as that one level. And there's no Madokans to save either. It's just literally just horrible platforming that's not great, if I'm honest. And it's the same in New and Tasty as well. I even thought this in New and Tasty. They actually changed certain things about those levels in New and Tasty that I thought made it even more difficult. I was like, why'd you do that for? But yeah, it's just not great.
Yeah, there is another flaw. You can only talk to one Madokan at once in this game, which means a lot of back and forth. If there's loads of Madokans in one place, you've got to lead them back and forth through sometimes really tricky areas just to get them to the portal so you can chance and get them out. Whereas later games allowed you to talk to multiple Madokans at once, which meant less back and forth.
Absolutely, it makes the game way more difficult. This is fixed in later Oddworld games, but yeah, that's definitely a big issue in the game. I mean, it was early days. It was their first ever game, Lorne's first ever game, so it's been a learning curve for them, and they have, prospered since then.
One thing they've always nailed is the cutscenes. Like, this game's cutscenes are glorious. Like, if you look at a lot of PS1 cutscenes from this era, they don't tend to hold up. I'd say the ones I'm thinking of are namely ones in Tekken and Tekken 2, which look really, really rough, and they're like the textbook example of how PlayStation 1 cutscenes were really janky for the most part. But the cutscenes in all the Oddworld games are all glorious, and they're leaps and bounds above most of the cutscenes from the era.
Yeah.
They're so good, it makes me wish we could have got a movie or an animated series from the Oddworld team. I think they might have planned a movie that came about, and that they perfectly capture like the dark tone of the game, and they add to the glorious atmosphere that it has. One thing I thought new and tasty liked was the original game's cutscenes were really dark, and then the new and tasty, they made them too bright, I thought.
There's a lot of points I want to make here. I'll start with the new and tasty one. So I think there's the original game, I read about this, there's a lot of decisions they made in the cutscenes with the colour grading and the colour design and stuff like that had a lot of thought behind it. There's a lot of purple, a lot of shadows and stuff like that. The purple is meant to illustrate the mysticism in Oddworld, like, the idea of magic and stuff like that. And the dark, kind of shadowy elements are kind of like to illustrate the more kind of gothic industrial elements conflicting with the mystical, as it were. And so, like, you go in Rupture Farms, it's all shadowy, like kind of grey, like very cold colours. And then you get freed into the Madokan temples, and it's all kind of green, purple and stuff like that, and very, spiritual in a way. And there's these very sort of deliberate decisions. With New and Tasty, there's less of that. I think what they've tried to do with New and Tasty is they wanted to focus more on the volatile, explosive side of Rupture Farms and industrialism. They put a lot of yellow in New and Tasty. It's very, very coloured. Like, it's just... I just think, to be honest, I think it loses the tension and the suspense that the original Oddworld had, and it kind of goes against their original decisions, so I'm not quite sure why they went in that direction. But also going back to the point you were making about the film, Rob, there was actually a film for Exoddus. They actually lumped all the
I know about this.
Yeah, they lumped all the cut scenes together of Oddworld Dave's Exoddus, and they actually did a film screening of it, and they actually won awards for the cinematic. So yeah, they were really well ahead of their time. I thought it was on par with Toy Story, like the animation in those cutscenes. I'd never seen really CGI to that standard up until that point. That's another reason why Oddworld really spoke to me. I literally, at one point, I would only play the first level and watch the same cutscene over and over again. And when YouTube came out, I was literally just watching the cutscenes just like I was watching a movie. It's crazy how amazing they are.
That's one thing that drew me to the games as well, because as you probably know if you've listened to previous episodes, I'm a big fan of like the output of mainframe animation and mainframe entertainment in the 90s, so stuff like Reboot, Shadow Raiders and Beast Wars, and all those cutscenes were on that kind of level, I thought.
Absolutely. I think there's something about old CGI that's kind of charming, and there's kind of the sort of clutteriness and stuff like that. I don't maybe clutteriness is not the right word for it, but there's something a bit more rusty and kind of I don't know how to describe it, but you know what I mean. It's kind of there's something.
Yeah, I get exactly what you mean.
It's something stylistically about that CGI then is really entertaining for me, especially for something like Oddworld, where it has to be a bit disturbing and gothic and otherworldly. It really translates well to it, and it's the same with Reboot as well. It tries to be an otherworldly thing, and sometimes that imperfect animation of that time kind of complements what they're going for, and I think that's really the case with Oddworld.
It reminds me a lot of the Fallout style of CG animation, because I know.
Oh yes,
I know that they made clay models of the various characters for this, and then scanned those into the computer in the same way that they did with Fallout.
So what shall it be? Do you join the Unity, or do you die here?
Join.
Die.
Join.
Die.
Yes.
So I think there's a bit of a stop motion quality to the.
I think that's what it is. It's the jagged motion.
That's one thing I thought. Yeah. With the gameplay, the gameplay looks like stop motion to me. Like especially stuff like the Paramites and the Sigs. The way they move feels like reminds me of stop motion.
Yeah, it's the jagged motions of the characters that I think really sells it for me. It feels like it's almost mechanical. It's a mechanical nature to the cinematics.
While we're talking about the comparison between the look of New and Tasty and the original Oddysee, I think one thing that did bother me a bit about New and Tasty was that it was made on the Unity source engine, and it was very clearly, I don't know if people have played on Unity games, but it was very it was a Unity engine game, you could tell, and I really loved the original's unique look, as you said, because it was an engine made by Oddworld inhabitants. That's the company, not actual inhabitants.
Ragdolls
Oddworld,
everywhere.
Yeah, it looks so good, the original game. Like, the engine looks amazing today. Whereas the Unity engine, you can tell it's the Unity engine, and it was just like it lost something along the way, I felt. At the same time, it was also a lot more playable for me as someone who was infuriated by a lot of the original.
We have to have some praises for New and Tasty, because there's a quick save feature, and literally everything we've criticised about the original was addressed in New and Tasty probably quite perfectly. There's multiple dockings can follow you at the same time. The buttons, the control. I'm a bit mixed about the controls, to be honest, but I think it's for newcomers. It's definitely more accessible. It does address those quite nicely, I think, New and Tasty.
And it does. It has 200 more. I think not only 200. I think 200 more Dockins on top of the original 99.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk about regarding Oddworld is that it's the first time, I want to say, I did mention that it was kind of gothic earlier. This is the first time in any kind of form of entertainment, I think, in my life, really, that I encountered something that's quite gothic. There's a lot of things you can sort of pick out in the game from, like, how the industrialists are trying to sort of, in a very disgusting and frightening sort of way, imitate nature and imitate themselves through technology and stuff like that. A lot of the sort of floaty things look like giant octopuses and spiders. There's like little towers that look like gluckons watching you with their, like, you know, gazing eyes and stuff like that. And also the sligs being like kind of cybernetic and stuff like that. There's a Frankensteinian like quality to that, I think. And also, if you read, there's a whole extended lore of Oddworld in the instruction manuals, and also there was a thing called Ask Alf on the Oddworld website, which actually kind of explored a bit more of the lore every week. I don't know if it's canon anymore, but what it's hinted at is that the Gluckons practiced alchemy at one point. Before, they used to be spiritual, just like the Medokans, and then they saw the Medokans saw the moon with their like paw on it, which is very biblical, by the way. Kind of reminds me of the Abraham story when he's looking up at the stars. But when the Gluckons saw that moon, they got really jealous of the Medokans. They closed themselves away. They refused to look at the moon. They refused to look at the night. And then they started experimenting with alchemy, which gets a bit explored in later games with, like, you know, Soulstorm Brewery and stuff like that. But there's this hint that, like, through capitalism and also alchemy, they lose themselves. They become shadows of what they formerly were. There's a lot of these gothic ideas just floating around Oddworld, and obviously, as I mentioned, the shadowy quality of the cutscenes. That's what kind of blew my mind a bit. I'm obsessed with the gothic in general, so the Oddworld might have been the very first instance of me experiencing something like that. So
yeah, it's basically the Hobbits versus Saruman.
Yeah, basically.
You have my sword. And you have my bow.
One thing I do want to bring, because you brought up the Gluckons, and that made me think. I didn't really think about the Gluckons are like the top of the food chain as far as we know in Oddworld.
Yeah.
And then at the very end of the game, you see them without their clothes on. We see they're basically just like a head with like really long legs. So it's like they are not intimidating as they make themselves out to be.
That's the kind of thing. It's meant to be a parody of like kind of like lazy business people and stuff like that. Really, just deep down, they're just like these useless kind of things that need to rely on sligs and other people to do all the work for them. So it's kind of almost like in their own character design, they're meant to be designed to look lazy. I remember reading that somewhere, which I thought.
Well, they look like an 80s businessman stereotype, because you've got what's his name, Moloch the Gluckon, who's literally chomping away on a massive cigar. He's got his business suit with a tie and everything. And then at the end, they zap his suit off, and you see he's like a little head, or like a big head, and then he's got like these little dangling arms, and then there's just these really tall legs that he's been standing on the whole time. It's almost like like a guy on stilts.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Kind of idea. It's a wonderful little joke at the end of the game. And I love, you're right, James. The sligs are really creepy because they've got like a weird octopus face, but then they're also they're robots as well, kind of, or they're cyborgs. It's a really interesting kind of like sci-fi gothic, again, kind of Fallout in that regard.
One thing I want to bring up. One thing I want to bring up about the Sligs is that their backstory is absolutely the most depressing thing ever. So basically, every race in Oddworld, the Gluckans, the Mudokons, and the Sligs all have a queen, and the queen actually is like basically the head of their species. They're the leader of their species, and they give birth to obviously other members of the species. It's kind of like ants. They have the queen and stuff like that. They follow the queen and whatnot. The Mudokon queen loves her children. Her name's Sam in the games, and she loves her children. She's enslaved, as it were, and she's forced to give birth to the Mudokons. It's really depressing in that regard. But the Slig queen is absolutely horrible. She just doesn't give a damn about her children and just sells them off to the Gluckans to be slaves. Which is just like, what?
The Sligs are definitely the kind of the foot soldiers, aren't they, of the Gluckans? And I do feel a little bad. It was interesting, Lorne Lanning talking about he really didn't want guns to be in the game because obviously like guns and action were such a big part of gaming at the time, and he was very adamant, I don't want guns in the game. But he did kind of cheat a little bit because you can mind control in this game with possession, and so you can jump into the brains of the various Sligs and control them and use their guns to kill other Sligs or to kill whatever.
Or the Slogs, the little dogs. That was one part with the Slogs, where you've basically got to possess a Slig, and then you've got the Slogs coming out of two separate kennels. You've got to turn left and right and shoot them.
Stand to the far right and shoot.
And I was trying for ages to do it, and then James told me, just stand at the very edge of the screen and shoot them all, and you'll be fine.
It's the same in New and Tasty as well.
First time I was like, oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, I actually did do that on New and Tasty. I just stood at the edge of the screen and just shot them from there. But yeah, no, it's a very a bizarre design choice by the team to do that section. It was an interesting design choice by the game developers where you have to turn left and right to shoot these Slogs, who are very fast, by the way. But also the Slogs, the fact that like 100 of them will all come out of their kennel. That some of those
and the last two come out the same kennel.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Oh, it's so annoying. Yeah, so again, there was some decisions where they kind of nerfed it a little bit in New and Tasty, which was the correct decision.
Yeah.
Because the amount of slogs are like the guard dogs. The amount of slogs that come out is just silly. And but anyway, there's a black humor to it, which I do understand. But when you're actually playing it, it's like, oh,
yeah,
come on, like let's get moving.
Yeah,
it does just stop the game.
Back to the positive. I want to talk about how gorgeous this game looks. I mean, talk about the cutscenes and how great they are, but like a lot of the backgrounds in this game are pre-rendered, and I feel each area has its own distinct look and feel. Like even like if you go back to Rupture Farms and go through the various Zulags to rescue the Mudokons. Like, each of them has a different colour, like aesthetic to differentiate it. That was the word. It just nails the atmosphere perfectly. And I think having the game in a 2D perspective allowed the game to have the look it does. Because if you look back at some of the games, at the same time, they tried to do 3D, and I think they still have their charm, but they've arguably aged worse than Oddworld, which was 2D in it, so I was able to do more artistically, I think.
The sort of cinematic pre-rendered backgrounds kind of adds a vastness to the whole thing, doesn't it? It makes you realise, even though you're kind of walking what is essentially like a line that's kind of left and right, it feels like you're in a massive like facility and stuff like that. And you get really immersed into the world.
And that's what Lorne Lanning's idea was, because I think he's done this really amazing kind of like digital painting of like a prehistoric creature.
Absolutely.
And he was high. Like he smoked a spliff or something.
That's the story.
And he was like, and then he's like, how do I get this into people's houses? And then he kind of noticed while he was like, he had the Atari 2600 joystick next to him, and then he kind of had the idea of having this painting move with the joystick and saying, this is it, games are the future.
It must have been really good weed.
That's what he said in the book. That's in the Age Origins book.
Yeah, it's mentioned in 2 of the art books. It's just like one of his favourite anecdotes. They got stoned and got into game development.
This is such a hippie game. Like, it's the most hippie game you'll ever play.
Oh,
like
yeah.
the whole idea of it being versus this meat processing plant, and you're fighting for the environment, and it's a vegetarian game in a lot of ways.
The Mudokons are hippies. They are all
that's
hippies.
Another point I want to bring up is this game has a morality system.
Yeah.
But it's not in your face about it. It points out what you need to do and rescue the Captain Mudokons, but it's up to you if you do it or not. Like, it doesn't tell you what will happen if you don't do it. So basically, of course, in the game you can talk to the Mudokons, and you've got to lead them to the portals. And it's not something you're forced. You can avoid most of them, but the game expects you to do that because it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
And if you don't rescue enough of them by the end of the game, you get the bad ending.
Let him.
This is the first game ever that had like multiple endings as well. The idea, I didn't experience the bad ending when I was a kid, but then my dad came home one day and said, "Hey James, do you know those Mudokons that you accidentally killed?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh yeah, they let you die at the end." And I was like, "What?" So that really just freaked me out as a kid. In fact, every Oddworld game apart from Stranger's Wrath has a bad ending, and gosh, Munch's Oddyssee's bad ending actually scarred me for life, and I actually didn't play Oddworld for years. If you want to have nightmares, just look up Munch's Oddysee on YouTube, the bad ending, because it is literally, it has no right to be as bad as it is. It's probably the worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
See you then! Surprise!
But anyway, I digress. I do like that. The lesson is, you got to look after your mates and stuff like that, and things will work out for you in the end. That's kind of the message, isn't it? Don't be a selfish.
And look after the planet.
Look after the planet, guys. I want to just quickly bring this in because I've kind of mentioned this earlier on. I wanted to tell a little story about because we were talking about how this is really accessible to multiple ages and stuff like that. There is a character in Oddworld, and there is a DLC in New and Tasty where you have to rescue this Mudokon called Alf.
Yes, Alf.
Alf, yes. And Alf is a very important character across Oddworld. He's actually introduced in Exoddus. He's not really in Oddysee, but in New and Tasty they kind of retcon that and say, oh, actually he was in Oddysee the whole time. But what that character was named after was actually a real person, and his name is Alfred Gamble. And basically, he was a Oddworld fan, and he was a war hero, basically, who had a wife that had a debilitating illness, and she passed away, sadly. And he was quite old at this time, and basically, he had no one left, and he felt suicidal. So he bought himself a pistol one day and decided, right, I've got some money left over, I'm just going to spend it all on whatever takes my fancy, and then I'm going to go kill myself, is what he thought to himself. So he went into a game store and he bought a whole bunch of games. He bought a PS1 and he also saw Abe, being showcased and whatnot in Abe's Oddysee. And he purchased that and he was like, right, well, I'm just going to buy this stupid game and play this and then, just end my life basically. But then he played Oddworld and something happens that he did not expect and he starts laughing. And he's like, hang on a minute, this Abe guy is a bit like me.
There was a guy, Alf, who we named the character after in Exoddus, who played Abe's Oddysee and sent us this 14-page handwritten letter. You're not going to believe this, but I had to tell you, your game saved my life. So here's a guy, he had been in World War II, in England. He was a veteran, survived the war, was a truck driver for years till eventually retired, led a humble life. His wife wound up with a debilitating disease, spent the last 8 years nurturing her, eventually, into the grave. And had lost all sense of hope, become really cynical, was disengaged from his grandkids, was just felt he had absolutely nothing left. And he had decided when she died, he was like, yeah, it's time for me to go too. So he can't do it. And he has a service revolver and he's writing this and he can't do it. He goes, I just can't pull the trigger and I'm mad at myself. And I figure, why is that? Why am I so weak? I can't do what I need to do. So he goes in, he goes to the store and he sees the PlayStation. And he sees Abe, right? Abe on the first game. He's just this kind of dopey looking guy on the cover. And I just thought, I'm buying a PlayStation and I'm going to buy that guy there. It was like the reason we designed him was the reason he attracted to him. It was like he just felt like I could relate to him, And then he goes home and he's really just trying to exhaust his resistance to committing suicide. But he starts playing our game. So he starts engaging and he said, I started doing something that I hadn't done in a long time, laughing. He goes, I started laughing and I got engaged. And every day I started playing and I started laughing more. And then I reached out and I contacted my granddaughters and I asked them if they had heard of that.
And he's really getting sucked into it, playing this game for hours and hours. And suddenly he loses the urge to commit suicide. And he wrote a long letter into Oddworld inhabitants saying about how this game changed his life, saved his life, and now because of this game he's now close to his family a bit more, he's seeing his granddaughters, and he suddenly has a new purpose in life, and he passed away of natural causes in the end. But yeah, that's the story of Alf. This game reached out to a lot of people, and it had an impact. I mean, it's obviously had an impact on me, but it's really reached people, Oddworld. So that's why I think it's one of the most important games out there. So I've wanted to tell that story anyway. So I thought,
that's amazing. And on that note, there is a story I read about in the Abe's Origins art book again. It's not about Oddysee, but it's about Exoddus.
It's the blind gentleman.
Someone was able to... Yes, someone who was blind was able to complete that game 100% because of how good the sound, able to perfectly judge what everything was based on what the sound design was like.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the sound actually, because I know that they mentioned that this was one of the first games to really integrate the way the sound worked into the gameplay, so you would know what certain actions were happening based on what the music or what the sound was doing.
Yes.
So when sligs are in the area, you can hear not only you can hear the sligs, but you can also hear the music will change. And there's just little notes. It's amazing. It's really well done.
That's one thing I love is the music changes and becomes a bit more industrial when you possess a slig. We have it's kind of more kind of tribal music for some parts, and then you possess a slig and it's the same music, but it's got more industrial aspects added to it.
Absolutely.
No, it's really and I have the deaf sound.
It's so good.
Now.
Do you know what really?
Dum dum.
Do you know what really gets me palpitating is when the drums start playing, when a monster's chasing you, when the Paramite or Scrab's chasing your slig, and it suddenly goes boom, 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 boom. You're like, oh no.
yeah. No, so I can totally see a blind person or visually impaired person would be able to play this because you can literally you can hear every kind of sound and every little detail. It's really cool. It's really well done, and it was one of the first games to kind of integrate the sound into the environment. You didn't just have music just playing over everything. There was a bit more detailing going into it, which it's very cool.
You'd know if a slig is nearby, for instance, because you can hear their mechanical legs in the background. It's clever things like that.
And they go back and forth as well, so you can hear them going further away and
getting closer.
To you.
Yeah, it's really well done, the sound design. Yes, another thing I wanted to bring up is the last point I've got here in my notes, and it's regarding the censorship of Oddworld. It's an interesting thing to talk about. It's documented.
Oh yes, I know. But is this the Japanese censorship?
Well, it's not just the Japanese censorship, but it's just in general how much Japan does not understand Oddworld at all. Like, I don't know what was going on there, but whoever was kind of like marketing the release of Oddworld was kind of thinking, I think they must have thought in their head, we need a cute game. We like cute games like Crash and Sonic and all that. So if you can look this up on YouTube. There's a Japanese commercial where basically it has a guy dressed up as Abe. It's like this J-pop thing. It's completely misses the point of Oddworld. It's so weird. And also, like, they're moving on to the censorship. Because the Mudokons have 3 fingers on their paws, that reminded Japan of...
The thing is 4... The other way around is 4 fingers.
Oh, 4 fingers, sorry, 4 fingers, I beg your pardon. So that apparently was meant to remind... That's an actual insult in Japan. If someone holds up 4 fingers like that, it's meant to indicate that you're a lower-caste worker, because workers would cut their fingers off by accident in, like, factories and stuff like that. So suddenly... across media and stuff like that, if Japan sees something that has like 4 fingers, they will immediately want you to censor it. And then Mickey Mouse did the same thing.
To be fair, it is true about the factory workers thing. But
it is.
It should be mentioned that in Japan, there is a cultural thing about the number 4, because 4 is very in the language is very similar to the word death.
Yeah.
So it's not just that. There is a reason, like a kind of cultural reason for why they would remove the 4 fingers, because they changed it so it's 3 fingers in the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's not just that. There is a for instance, they if say a building has 4 floors, what they'll do is they'll say the ground floor 1, 2, 3. They won't say 1, 2, 3, 4 or anything like that.
But at the same,
so it's more than just that. There is a cultural reason.
But that I just kind of I just what from what I read from the
other thing that sense was the Mudokon Pops.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the story behind that. What was the story behind that? Do we know?
I think it's just the violence of the image.
I think it's something to do with something that's actually happening in Japan. Something to do. I think it might be something to do with the Yakuza. I'm not 100% sure of that. That's a bit of a funny one.
Plus, also, people must have seen that commercial and just expected something else complete, and then played the game and must have had a big shock.
Okay, so it turns out the design was changed due to the Kobe child murders in Japan.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough, I guess. I don't know.
It's like how in the early 2000s, like a lot of guns were taken out of certain things because of Columbine.
Well, it's the same. I guess. Yeah, it's a tricky one, but I just don't. I don't know. Maybe it's not.
It doesn't bother me. Like, it's fine. Like, that happens. Like, for instance, they removed children from Fallout because in Germany they were very strict about that in the European version.
What it is I think the big issue I have is the inconsistency, because when you jump onto Exoddus, the Mudokon Pop looks completely different and less sinister, and I think that really sucks. And of course now the Mudokons have one less finger. So I don't know. I just feel like it's just a bit of. Plus, they have to actually actively now go back to the character model and remove that finger of Abe and stuff, and it's just like, oh, great.
Yeah, it's an extra bit of faff, but Japan is a big gaming market, so you didn't want to lose it.
Yeah.
The good thing about GT Interactive, who I think were also responsible, I think they published Doom. And Duke Nukem and some other games like that back in the 90s. And what was good about GT Interactive was that they gave their developers control of their intellectual property. So Lorne, Lanning and Oddworld inhabitants have always had control over Oddworld. They've never lost it over the years. It's not like a Tim Kaine and Black Isle Studio situation with Fallout, where Interplay sold, the Fallout rights to Bethesda. So the original creators lost control of it.
Yeah.
So it is really good. So fair play to GT Interactive for allowing the developers to hold on to their games. They didn't lose them to the publisher. But also one thing I wanted to talk about very quickly, because I know we probably want to wrap up soon. But there's a really interesting thing about the late 90s, it was just looking at 1997 when Oddworld came out, is the amount of amazing games that were coming out at this time, because we had Fallout, GoldenEye, Final Fantasy VII. Like, these were huge games.
Tomb Raider 2.
Tomb Raider 2, Crash Bandicoot 2. There's loads of great games from this period. And I was just thinking about the fact that I was looking at the budget, and with Oddworld cost $4 million, which, fair enough, that's a fair amount of money. GoldenEye cost $2 million. Fallout cost $3 million. So these are all, it's a fairly big amount of money, but not huge. And then you get to the PS2 era, and let's think of, say, I was looking at like a game like Final Fantasy X. That cost around $32 million. This was 4 years later. This was 2001. So there was a very big jump in budgets. And 32 million in those days was around 50 million today. And I think what was wonderful about that era is that when you were not a tiny independent studio, but also not a huge studio, you could be like a little medium studio in the middle with a budget of 2 million and make a really iconic game like Oddworld. Shame that we've kind of lost that along the way, where now the new Oddworld games are all needing to be made with crowdfunding and things like that. That it's kind of lost that middle ground point in gaming. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting thing to consider, how so many amazing games were born from that era, and now they've kind of been lost along the way.
They made Exoddus in a year now. But now, like, the
it wasn't even a year, it was 9 months.
9 months, yeah. But now, Oddworld games take about 3 to 4 years to make, so it'll probably be about 32 by the time the next Oddworld comes out.
Yeah,
if at all.
No, they're huge. These are gargantuan games that are being made now. With like full motion capture and full animation and all these things.
And a much smaller team as well. There's a smaller team making it.
Yeah. No, it's crazy how different the gaming industry is now, and what it's having to compete, and what Oddworld is having to compete with in terms of the really big budgets of the AAA games, or the small like independent games that are made by like 1 or 2 people. But anyway, we've got this wonderful game called Oddworld, made in Abe's Oddysee, made in 1997, and I'm glad that it exists. And
I'm very happy
it was made the way it was made.
One of the greatest games I've probably ever played in my entire life, actually, goes far to say.
I do prefer Exoddus, which was a sequel, but Oddyseey does have some elements that outshine Oddyseey. Mainly, Oddyseey has elements that outshine Exoddus. Namely the atmosphere. I think Oddyseey has the better atmosphere, I feel.
Yeah. I mean, Exoddus also has a lot going on for it as well, atmospherically as well. But we'll save that for another episode. There's a lot to be said about Exoddus as well, and the other God Worlds.
I think all I want to say is that I kind of want to try out Paramite pies because I hate Paramites so goddamn much after the Paramite Temple. The game has actually turned me into even more of a carnivore, so I'm very sorry, Lorne Lanning. It failed. I now hate the creatures of Oddworld, and I fully support the Gluckans in their monstrous destruction of
First our meat, now our bones, and now our tears. It's a quote from Exoddus.
We completely forgot to mention Abe speaks in rhyme, because this game is amazing and does stuff like that. But anyway.
Yes, I've actually got Paramite Pie's poster on my wall, by the way. I've got literally all the Oddworld. I've got all the Oddworld, like, the banners at the beginning of the game. All of those are on my wall at the moment.
Right now, I'm looking at an Abe statue, which I got with the deluxe edition of Soulstorm.
Oh yeah, got that around as well.
So next time, we are tackling our first ever listener request, and we're going to be taking a look at Power Rangers RPM, which was the last entry in the Power Rangers franchise, which was produced while Disney had the franchise. And it's a post-apocalyptic series, interesting enough, which almost ended up being the very last in the franchise. So it'll be interesting to take a look at that.
Power Rangers in the post-apocalyptic Earth. It's apparently that exists. There you go. I remember reading it in Wikipedia, just going like, "What?"
Very excited because I know absolutely nothing about Power Rangers, so this is going to be a fun.
And I know more about Power Rangers than I have any right to. So
I'm somewhere in between.
Yeah, until next time, the Bloobcast bids you farewell.
Yeah, remember to comment, like, and subscribe.
Help, 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 help.
Okay.
Freeze.
Thank you for listening to Bloobcast. We've been Rob, James, and Euan. You can find all of our episodes on bloobcast.com. We're also available on SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
We also have a YouTube channel where we produce shorter episodes called Blooblets, where we discuss the latest news in popular culture. You can find us on social media with @BlueCastPod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please like, follow, and subscribe so you can get the latest updates on new episodes.
We also have an email address, which is bloobcast@outlook.com. So if you have any feedback or want to suggest things for us to review in our future episodes, please feel free to drop us an email and you'll get a shout out on the next episode. Please also rate and review us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. More engagement helps us a lot. And finally, please share the podcast amongst your friends and family. Help spread the word so that the Bloobcast empire can become strong and mighty.